Yesterday, I was listening to the Face Check podcast hosted by LS and I Will Dominate, and something Dom said just stuck with me since then. He said that this is the most doomed NA has ever been. Besides being super pessimistic, it was hard to argue that he was wrong. There are more obstacles in NA's way this year than there ever have been in the past. This year there are 4 teams coming from the LEC and the LPL, which are arguably the 2 strongest regions in the world. And if their 4th seed teams make it out of play-ins, which is honestly very likely, then there will be a Chinese and European team in every single group. This automatically makes it harder for NA because we just have less teams in the tournament. On top of this, the only real hope when it comes to the tournament format and group straw is that we have a pool 1 slot for our 1st seed, which went to TSM, which we'll talk about them more in a coming video. But in this video, we're going to focus on our 3rd seed, Team Liquid. To show you how bad it really is, our 2nd seed is placed in pool 3. This makes groups way harder for our 2nd and 3rd seed FlyQuest and TL because they are likely to be placed in groups with the top Chinese or Korean teams. To show you the contrast in competition, the 2nd and 3rd seeds from the LPL are in pool 2, where the 2nd seed from NA is placed in pool 3. We will look more at the updated Worlds format later, but I kind of agree with what Dom said. This year is looking doomed for NA, but that doesn't mean it's time to give up all hope. Every year, one of the most exciting times is Worlds, and with NA being the underdogs, it's always fun to speculate and to watch them play, hoping that a miracle happens. So people can hate on TSM, people can hate on other NA teams. I'm gonna choose to be hopeful, and I'd rather be proven wrong, but enjoy the excitement along the way just in case something happens. At the end of this series, I'll give my chances for each region winning Worlds, but in the meantime, let's look more specifically at NA's chances this year. The first thing I want to bring up is C9, and I know this is kind of a sensitive topic right now, but I want to talk about them not making Worlds because that made a lot of people worried about NA's strength in general. There's no denying that C9 is NA's Worlds team. TSM might have won more championships, but C9 is the team you look to get out of groups and even make a run at semis. This is compounded by the fact that they dominated the spring split and had the fast, scrappy pace that can compete with Chinese and European teams. When they were knocked out in the summer playoffs, it was kind of a letdown because the teams that we are sending to Worlds have been historically underwhelming, and the current TSM team might have domestic experience but has never made it past groups at Worlds for a very long time. So this year, there is no C9 to root for to make a decent run in the tournament. We are looking at a new TSM team that has a history of not making out of groups with an infamous 3-3 record. We have FlyQuest, which has a slower style of play with older players, which will make it difficult for them to adapt to the quick skirmishing style that the LPL and LEC commonly use. And then we have this new iteration of Team Liquid, which has some great Worlds talent, but will have to fight for their spot in groups, and once they do, they'll be filed at the bottom of the group with some of the top teams in the world. So what are NA's chances at Worlds 2020? Will this be the year that one of our teams makes a run for the final? Well, let's take a look.
Alive and walking away is Bear on the jump in. Can't find it. He goes double lift. There's 1 kill. There's 2. Look at the team fight victory. Team Liquid immediately grabs 4.
Like I mentioned earlier, the format for Worlds is not in NA's favor. In the past, there was the potential to be put in a group of life, which meant that one of our teams was placed with a wildcard team and the 3rd seed from EU. There was very little hope to beat out the Chinese or Korean team for 1st, but there was always a hope that we could slide in 2nd. This year, that far-fetched dream isn't even possible. If everything plays out like it should, there will only be 2 teams that aren't from one of the 4 major regions. The first, which is the PCS 1st seed Matcha Esports, Matcha Esports. And the second will likely be PSG Talon, which is the 2nd seed from the PCS. However, I do think that the Unicorns of Love can make a run to get into groups, and they are definitely not a team that you assume an easy win for. So it is safe to say that this year, above all other years, all 4 of the main groups are going to have a lot of talent. The best teams and the best players are going to be there. Most analysts think that the LPL and LEC are the strongest regions, with LCK barely behind them. And after the 3 major regions, you have NA, which has historically been better than the minor regions, but also pretty far behind the other 3. And this year, the top 2 regions get more teams at Worlds, so it's definitely an uphill battle. So let's start at the bottom and take a look at TL's chances.
I'm curious, do you think you will get the better spot?
No, obviously he's gonna play in playing stage, but I think playing stage will be really good for them.
Okay.
There is a lot of game, good practice, so I recommend them to play there.
Okay, good. I'm glad. I'm sure they will take that recommendation. We'll
Yeah.
see how things go for them.
Team Liquid has 2 former world champions in Impact in Season 3 and Core JJ in 2017, so they are no strangers to the world stage. You then have Broxa, who is in the final, and Jensen, who has made it out of groups many times and even made it to semis. And lastly, you have Tactical, who's a rookie who has shown to be a rockstar ADC and very confident in his play. All these players are insane, and as a team, they have a lot of international experience. Unfortunately, the organization doesn't have the greatest history on the international stage, but with all of their talent, I think this is the best shot that they've had. I don't think Tactical and Doublelift are very far off as players, and I think they're very similar. Although Doublelift has more experience and has been more dominant in North America, I don't think there is much of a gap in skill, and I think they will perform very comparably at Worlds. My only worry with Tactical is the jitters of playing on such a big stage, but at this Worlds, all the teams will be in a bubble, so the big stage and huge crowd aren't going to be that much of a factor, so I think he's going to be okay. The only thing I'm worried about is Broxa. He has shown to have a pretty limited champion pool, and the biggest weakness they had against TSM was the draft, especially when it came to junglers. TSM knew that he had a small champion pool and punished him for it. However, 3 weeks is a good amount of time to talk to the other regions and learn from solo queue and scrims about the best junglers in the meta and reorient his champion pool. He was one of the greatest European junglers before he came to NA and has been to a world final, so I'm not super worried about him. When it comes to their playstyle, I do think Broxa and Core need to be more aggressive. The LEC and LPL are known for their scrappy style, and TL needs to be ready for this. Also, most of the games that Team Liquid dominated this year were on the backs of Broxa and Core as they made aggressive moves to find advantages. They were a very consistent team in the regular season, so I know if they fix a couple of things in their draft and playstyle, they can do well at Worlds. But we have to consider that Worlds is not nice to teams who play slow and cautious, so TL has a couple of things to work on before the start of play-ins.
Well, that's HQ.
HQ is around.
Oh my god, close. We held
Okay, don't overreact, guys. Don't overreact, guys.
Guys, we lost.
Before we go into the teams that they can potentially face, I want to mention something that makes Worlds 2020 different than the last 9 iterations. Worlds this year will be conducted in a bubble, and the players have very little contact, if none at all, with other teams competing, and to even start the competition, they have to go into an individual 14-day solitary confinement quarantine. These quarantines are happening individual, not in a bubble as a team. This can be very hard on the mentality of some players, so more than ever, mental toughness and team cohesion is one of the most important aspects of this Worlds. And part of the battle teams will face is keeping their teams mentally and emotionally healthy while and after they are in quarantine. Predicting their path is difficult, especially when the Worlds draw hasn't even happened yet, but we can look at some hypotheticals. The only team that will likely make play-ins look like a walk in the park is LGD, which is the 4th seed from LPL. I predict that they will 4-0 their group and get out as the 1 seed easily, and other than that, I think Mad Lions is likely on par with Team Liquid. I think Humanoid, Kaiser, and Shadow are great players, so I think they're definitely going to make it to groups. It really depends if TL draws Mad Lions or not. If they are drawn into a group with PSG without Unicorns of Love, I think it is a walk in the park into the group stage. Their experience and team play is unmatched against the other teams. However, if they get in a group with LGD and Unicorns of Love, it'll be a fight for second place. In general, play-ins are going to be easier to make it out of because there are only 10 teams instead of 12 like the past years, and it depends on what other teams they get in their group to decide if play-ins will be easy or hard for them to get out, but I think reasonably we can assume that they'll get out. So we're assuming they make it out of groups, so what awaits them there? Well, at worst they get Top Esports as the 1st seed, and at best they get G2. So they are against one of the top 3 teams in the world for sure, so we can't expect them to make it out first. Plus, it's just NA, so we can't really assume that either. But what about the other teams? What is the group of life situation that we can potentially hope for? Well, for starters, we can hope that they get drawn into the group with Machi Esports. This is the best case scenario for a Pool 3 team, so let's take a look at some of the Pool 2 seeds to see what they could potentially go up against. The LEC's Pool 2 team is Fnatic, which is hard because from what I've seen of Fnatic, it looks like them and TL have very similar styles that Fnatic just pulls off better. This being said, Team Liquid has an insanely large coaching staff and a large amount of experience and talent, so I don't want to count them out against Fnatic, so for the sake of argument, we'll chalk it up for a 50-50 chance. I think the other team they would want to draw is Sunning from the LPL, which is their 3rd seed. If they end up drawing DRX or JD Gaming, it's going to be very difficult for them to get out. And if they do get out of play-ins and they do get this awful draw and somehow make it out of groups, we can safely say that TL succeeded this year at Worlds and helped bolster the reputation of the LCS. So my prediction so far, pre-group draw, is that TL will make it out of play-ins pretty handedly, and if they're placed in a good group, I think they have the potential to make it out as a 2nd seed. But if they get placed with Top Esports and DRX, there's no way they're making it out of groups. Stay tuned to next week when I post a video on the Worlds Draw so that we can analyze the specific groups and play-in matches to try and predict the possible outcomes for this Worlds. Team Liquid has a hard road ahead of them, but of all the NA teams, they have the most experience and raw talent to get them there, so I'm hopeful for their performance and praying that they get a good placement into the group stage after they roll over the competition in play-ins.